as someone who has very much lived in the day-to-day world in the AML, whether it's from investigating transactions through alerts or investigations, or onboarding customers at the due diligence stage, you know, I'm always concerned about, being held to a 2020 hindsight or second guessing standard. So I put together this slide to show a couple of things. One is it was detected multiple times without a lot of effort, and that gets into the purpose, not pageantry. If you look at this, and the other thing is, I couldn't help but want to emphasize the age of Jho Low during all these transactions. You can see in 2009 he was 28. By the time the whole thing was blowing up in 2013, he was 32, and yet he was embezzling billions and billions of dollars. And he was going to banks that not only should have known better, but in many cases they did. So if you look at the 2009, Goldman Sachs European Private Wealth turned him down because they said they questioned his source of wealth. He was declined by Goldman Asia Regional Project. The Business Intelligence Group turned him down. BSI Compliance turned him down out of Switzerland. And the banker there said, I don't like these transactions at all. It looks and feels very suspicious. And then you go into later years, 2011, 2012, you're seeing the continued groups of these banks that were actually part of the problem are turning them down. And there's a lot of deception going on within the banks where some people are trying to, stop it, and other people are trying to push it through. So I do think that having a sense of purpose, and once you make a decision, enforcing the decision and not trying to find excuses, to carve out, certain types of transactions that are okay. Once you know you have a bad customer, it's like cancer. You need to get it out.
Sure. Well, I guess
the other thing, I have this at the top. Jho Low had no pedigree apart from the political connections he had. There was no basis for him to have any money at all. He's 28, 29, 30 years old, and he really didn't have much money. He created the appearance of having money, but it was all illusory. And none of it could be independently verified. It was all just stories that he was giving people.
So they couldn't verify, but they were like convinced from the people that he was associated with and the image that he created from the beginning.
That's right. But that's a double-edged sword. He's saying I'm associated with political people, and therefore you should give me accounts. Well, that's a PEP. That's the very, very danger of a PEP account. Is the only reason that he has money is because of his political influence.
So true. Yeah, absolutely.
The next group of slides, probably could be the subject of a whole separate exercise, and actually probably I will break these slides out more, but it really talks about how do you set up a good program to detect not only this kind of activity, but anything else. And, I was fortunate enough to be in the AML area right after the Patriot Act. So went through, the entire formation of the industry when I was over at JP Morgan, and then later Wells Fargo. But, one of the problems we had was all the systems were set up by these statisticians that had never found suspicious activity at all. And so the amount of noise and poor yield in the alerting engines was overwhelming. And one of the things that we tried to do in trying to have good governance on these programs was to have some common vocabulary that tried to help us talk to the technology people on whether we had a good program or not. And what I did was I used a framework from the technology group itself, which is called the DIKW hierarchy. D is data, I is information, knowledge is the K, and then wisdom is where you want to get to. And all of the systems were at the data. They basically were generating these raw alerts that were basically standard deviation type things. And the yield was, less than 1% as far as useful stuff, or even worse, maybe you would have robo-SAR filings. It wasn't until you got to the wisdom where people are actually saying, what is my risk appetite? Who are the customers I don't want? That sort of thing, that you started getting into an effective program. And so this is how we, look at a program and try to say, where are you in this hierarchy? And if we go to the next slide, we get to how, at least in some cases, and certainly me, evaluate a good AML program. So Shanaz is very familiar with the next two slides because we, along with her peers or whatever, would go and visit our correspondent.
Yes, I remember.
And we got down to the fact that we basically had, one piece of paper, two sides, that was the basis of our discussions with our customer banks, and quite frankly, the basis on how we evaluated the degree of reliance we were going to have on their AML programs. And it was all decision centric. And so the first thing we would ask is, who do you bank? And we're looking for their business strategy. Are you a retail bank? Are you a private bank? Small business bank, whatever. We wanted deep, broad relationships where we actually understood our customers, and we hoped that our customer banks had broad relationships because we could leverage that, how well they knew their customers. The other thing that we wanted, and this was very important for the activity reviews, we wanted real people doing real things transparently. And we'll get into that in all of the activity side. Remember, the whole 1MDB thing was not, it was illusory. It was not real people. They weren't doing real things. They were embezzling. So, but if you find indicia of real people doing real things transparently, then you can get very comfortable. And we called that explain the benign. And I would say 95% of the customers that we had in the correspondent, they could very much explain the benign, and we could validate it through some pretty basic activity reviews where you can heat map the customer base and you say, yes, this is real people doing real things transparently for very objective reasons. The flip side is who you don't want to bank. Who do you want to keep out? And that's what the AML programs are for. You don't want unknown people hiding in the shadows, which, most of the 1MDB stuff fell into that category. You don't want the typologies or known trouble spots that you would have for corruption. And you want you want people to tell you who they don't want to bank with some examples and detailed examples, not just, oh, we don't want criminals, but, depending on where you are. If I'm talking to a Mexican customer, they might tell me how they try to keep the cartels out of the bank. If I'm talking to someone in the UAE, they might tell me how they're trying to avoid sanctions evasion. But the more they have those kind of detailed examples, the better I feel about it. And then how you tell the difference. The very first thing that we do is we say to a customer, no matter where in the world they are, tell us success stories. Tell us of cases where you found bad customers. How did you find them? What did you do with them? And every single bank in the world has bad customers. It's how you find those customers and can you articulate it, particularly at the senior business level. Oftentimes, I found that the senior business people were much better at telling the success stories than maybe their day-to-day compliance people, which was good as far as the bank was concerned, I got a little concerned that maybe their program wasn't as mature as I wanted. But if you have the senior business people that's involved in decisions, that's very helpful. The other thing we would do is we do activity reviews on 100% of our customers, including all of the US banks that were our customers, so that we could explain the benign. We'd quantify it. We had risk proxies that we'll talk about throughout this group of seminars about how we quantify the benign and how we do risk proxies through heat mapping. We talk to our customers on a regular basis, at least once a year, oftentimes more often. And then the other thing, finally, is we look for the level of senior leadership engagement. And I'm not just talking about, a blanket statement saying, yes, our compliance is important. I'm talking like, are they really involved in the decisions? And it doesn't take very long to be in a meeting about compliance decisions, and you can tell which of the senior leadership really understands what's going on and who doesn't. And quite frankly, our examiners do the same to us. And when they're talking to our senior leadership, most of the discussion is between the examiner and the senior leadership about the details of decisions that they made. And that really shows a credible program, is where the senior leaders really understand the customers and can articulate that, to any outside stakeholder.
Absolutely. I think these are very crucial points. If I can take you back just 1 second to unknown people hiding in the shadows, this point, and, in your opinion or with your experience, so I would very much focus on this point because, when we are talking to banks, when banks are trying to develop their framework, I think this is very, very crucial. So whenever you meet with customers, how do you try to understand whether, they have the tools, the proper people to find who are hiding, in their customer portfolio?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is, if you have a certain type of customer base, let's say retail customers, those kind of customers should have very objective transaction traits and demographic traits and that sort of thing that you can judge objectively without having a very in-depth KYC system. So I'll give you an example. There was a period where we were having discussions with our regulator about our Central American customer base, and we maybe had 100, banks in Central America, and that wasn't Mexico; that was south of Mexico, for a long time, it was like, well, that's a risky area of the world for the United States because of all the cartel activity. And we went in, we took a look at the activity, and we found that it was what we would call highly distributed activity. So you might have someone who's buying a car, or you might have someone who is supplying Levi Strauss, with blue jeans, or you might have someone who's exporting, fruit to the United States. And you would see from that they would have a public profile. You'd look them up on the thing, and you'd see, that's what they do. They produce fruit, or they're a fishing company, or whatever they are. You would see that their counterparties are people that you would expect in that business, like a Levi Strauss or someone like that. You would see transaction traits that would be very common for that, either because of the time of year, the amounts. You might see other indicia of paying shipping companies or that sort of thing. That's real people doing real things transparently. Unknown people hiding in the shadows would be when you have, and we'll get into this, but some of the co-conspirators with Jho Low, they have absolutely no pedigree. they have accounts at offshore financial institutions, private bank, and they have billions of dollars going through their accounts. And, they may have a story that is embedded in the KYC system, but there's absolutely no way to validate it. And the transactions are so disproportionate to reality that you just simply say, this person has no pedigree that I can validate. And so from my perspective, they're unbankable.
Exactly. And I think that the bank absolutely have to have the system to identify, the transactions when they are still, taking place or not very stale. So that's also another, tool from tool perspective, I think is important.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. But I also, and we'll talk about this in future things, it's not overly hard. I was at very, very large banks where we would look at like all of our customers, either with a particular product, like all of the cash customers of a bank like JPM, or all of a particular customer group, like all the hedge funds or whatever. And you would look at them as a group. And if you heat mapped them and started comparing them to other things, the unknown people hiding in the shadows stand out like flashing red light. It's very, very doable with some rudimentary techniques. You just have to have a sense of purpose. And then you have to be willing to make a decision. And if you have these outliers that make no sense, at some point you just simply say, you know what, I'm not going to risk my entire institution on someone, with no pedigree. And you look at the slide that we had before with all of the people within Goldman or BSI or whatever, they all knew, like from day one,
Right.
that this didn't make any sense.
Absolutely.
And then they made the decision. It was only later that you had people that, in retrospect were corrupted, that, forced it through. But having said that, there was plenty of other people that surrounded them that if they had been more decisive, could have stopped it.
Absolutely. Great points, Tom.